It's an exciting time for those of us that work in the decision intelligence space with seemingly opportunities everywhere to bring our skills and our tools and our talents to bear. But Laura Albert, past president of Informs, professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, comes on the Decision Intelligence Lab podcast this time to talk about research around the grand challenges for industrial and systems engineering, the big problems as we look to the future that we can apply our talents to. She also offers up some perspectives on how to educate industrial engineers, systems engineers, and other people that are going to be involved with decision intelligence in the future. Anyone interested in big problems and big opportunities will want to listen to this episode.
To use GenAI effectively, you need to be an expert at the topic to understand when you're getting a good answer, when you're getting a great answer, when you're getting a hallucination. And I do see that engineers are in a good position there, but we have to dig into that engineering knowledge and be able to leverage that. And I think it's harder to teach with Gen AI. The AI that will be available in a couple of years is going to be so much better than it is now. So we need to constantly think a couple steps ahead of where it's at.
All right, today's guest is Professor Laura Albert. She's a professor of industrial and systems engineering at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She's a past president of Informs, and she's also very active on social media where I got to know her. She's a great ambassador for the field, active on LinkedIn, and maintains a blog, a long-running blog at this point called Punk Rock Operations Research. I recommend you take a look at that. And she was also one of the authors on a recent paper, Grand Challenges in Industrial and Systems Engineering, which we'll talk about today. So welcome to the show, Laura.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's start with the paper. So it's a big paper, a lot of authors. So what motivated the development of the Grand Challenges in Industrial and Systems Engineering paper?
Well, really, it was Waldemar and Gabrielle who were the kind of visionaries for this paper. But I will say that I'm a big fan of Grand Challenges. I've blogged extensively about previous Grand Challenges. And after the pandemic, it felt like we were ready for another set of Grand Challenges in my mind. With my administrative roles and my leadership role at Informs, I didn't really have the initiative to start it, but I was so grateful to be involved in the conversation. We have a great story to tell, and I think industrial engineering and operations research is needed more than ever now. And the challenges are new, and they're important, and they're consequential to human flourishing and our economy. So it was, I believe it was great timing.
Excellent. I'm interested a lot, Laura, in resiliency of complex systems. I'm kind of the belief that we've built kind of by some combination of evolution and intention these large complex systems that we used to be super productive and super effective and yet are completely dependent on. And so I'd be really interested in how you guys, in writing the report, thought about resiliency of systems and kind of how you defined it, in particular, kind of how security fits into that. That's a long question, but hopefully that makes sense.
It's a great question, and one that's really important to our community. Probably the first thing that comes to my mind as a grand challenge since the pandemic is this issue of resiliency. I think it's particularly important for our community because we've done so much for resiliency over the years, yet we have a fascination with optimality, and sometimes optimal solutions can be really fragile. And so it's kind of a little bit of a disconnect. And so it's a great time to revisit the question of resiliency and alignment. And, resiliency in itself is kind of a broader topic, and we tend to focus on, one aspect of resiliency, which is getting the system's operations and metrics up to their, pre-disruption level. So it's really, there's normal conditions, there's a disruption, and getting back to normal as quickly as possible. There are some really good papers on the topic, David Woods and Tom Sharkey and some co-authors, looking at some different notions of resilience for sure, which is like self-adaptation. And trying to remember them all off to the top of my head, but it's a bigger
lot.
Paper. Read the paper. And I think cybersecurity emerged from this, because it's also an important topic where there's a lot of overlap in terms of what industrial engineers do. Software supply chains is massive, and a lot of the risks, cyber risks, are coming through supply chain risks. And we have a lot of expertise there that's really has been untapped.
Did you get a sense, like when you said at the beginning you really liked the idea of writing this paper, it sort of felt like it was time, and when you just gave that answer, I kind of thought in my head, like, is one of the things you were thinking of is that our field needs to think bigger, and resiliency is a great example that it sort of crosses lots of different areas, lots of different systems, and you thought it was time for us to, as a profession, to kind of step up and address that?
Yes, absolutely. I'm a firm believer in thinking big. Never think small. Sometimes I annoy people, but I think it's good to have big dreams, and it's good for us as a field to have big dreams, because this, propels us forward. It helps motivate new funding streams. It lets the world know what we have to offer, and even motivates new curricula that can help educate the workforce. So it's a big multiplier effect.
Interesting. Mike, I'm going to throw it over to you. You've got on the board cybersecurity and supply chains, or industrial and systems engineering education. Yeah, you talked about new education, so let's dive into that, because I think you recently wrote a blog following up on the Grand Challenges paper, and you said there's 3 things. Your third thing was talking about the different case studies that we could develop. So I'm kind of curious, like, what are your thoughts on, like, how we should think about developing these new case studies to basically bridge the gap between what we're doing here in academia with what people in industry need?
Oh, absolutely. So I think about this a lot, in particular as a former department chair. I think about developing the curriculum, like real nuts and bolts. Like, what do I do with my department's curricula a lot? Right. Of course, the president of Informs, I'm like, what should we all be kind of doing? And I think it comes down to one key thing is we need to look at our required undergraduate courses. I think they're so important, and there's really a lot of potential there to be nimble, and also to provide really important education. And one of the challenges with education is if you add something in, you really have to take something out. I'm at a state university. We have a lot of pressure for students to graduate in 4 years. But all of our students are exposed to kind of these required courses, and thinking about case studies that you can do in one of those courses, like modules that you can sort of add. Even just one case study each time you teach a course can really improve the course quite a bit. So I've been working on developing AI case studies for the courses I teach. Also, resilience is a big aspect. And I taught engineering economics last semester, and I developed some engineering ethics case studies. Of course, that's important for ABET, but also I just felt like this is what students need to know.
Okay. Yeah, I've always kind of felt in my gut that there's a lot of case studies floating around our profession, and we haven't done a great job, or there's not a big incentive to share these widely. And I thought there was always some opportunity for, as a field, to sort of create some good case studies, share them pretty widely, so that it is easier for anyone who's teaching this topic to sort of pick and choose the cases that they want.
I agree. We don't have as much of a tradition of that in engineering, and it's a weakness, but also an opportunity.
Yeah.
So I guess maybe you touched, Laura, a little bit on using GenAI to do some work with cases. I'd love to kind of elevate that GenAI topic a bit to talk about, as we're talking about education, how do we need to do a fundamental rethink in the age of GenAI, and are there kind of big changes that you imagine are critical, as opposed to the curriculum committee, 7 weeks on this, 6 weeks on that? Should we be thinking differently?
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked that question. The course I'm developing and teaching this semester is AI and systems, and kind of in part it's to help me learn about that topic as well, because I do believe that there probably are some ways we need to think differently about AI, especially in an industrial and systems engineering context, where some of our students are going to be kind of deep into the foundation models, but in general, they're going to be more higher level managers. We're going to have students that are going to be chief AI officers in just a few years. But that's a role that's like perfectly suited for industrial systems engineers. Yet, are we really training them for that? So the vision for my course is to, if you imagine like the T-shaped education where you have topics that are really broad, this is mostly on the broad aspect, and that it's supposed to, we have a number of AI courses in the department, but thinking about the broader skills and connecting it not just to how, the AI might perform. So like the area under the curve, ROC curves, but really bringing it back to the system, but also talking about, governance, ethics, some of the bigger picture topics, as well as human aspects with human AI teaming. It's given me a lot of things to think about. And yet I came back, I do think this course is important, but I did come back to this idea of some of these topics we need to integrate into our required courses. And so my plan when I teach engineering economics again next semester is to have a case study on evaluating the costs of AI, because it is really expensive. And that's one of the themes that comes up from my course is investing in better data, investing in the AI, testing it. Governance is time consuming and expensive, but stepping students through that bigger picture of how to evaluate it. And then, instead of having 30 students in one course as an elective, I'll be able to hit the entire student body with a case study, and that, can really advance our education.
So staying on that same theme, and in the paper made kind of a bold claim. The basic idea of the paper was that if industrial and systems engineering programs don't change, it's like we could just become completely irrelevant. And they were, talking about ideas. And one of the ideas that came up in the paper was, should we model ourselves more like medical school, where they're attached to a hospital and they sort of see the problems that they'll have to deal with? And, is there such equivalent for in an engineering school, and especially for industrial engineers? How do you think about that? Or you have any comments on that, or schools that you've seen do that well?
I think it's good to come into this discussion with that threat that's out there, because we're really seeing that AI does some things really well, like programming, like really well.
Yeah.
And it's really, I'm thinking I want to completely teach students how to program differently, alongside GenAI, and that's going to look different in a few years. The AI that will be available in a couple of years is going to be so much better than it is now. So we need to constantly think a couple steps ahead of where it's at. One common theme that's been kind of constant is that engineering knowledge is really hard to get, and it's very helpful. Like, to use GenAI effectively, you need to be an expert at the topic to understand when you're getting a good answer, when you're getting a great answer, when you're getting a hallucination. And I do see that engineers are in a good position there, but we have to dig into that engineering knowledge and be able to leverage that. And I think it's harder to teach with Gen AI. We saw that there was less. Let's go back about 20 years ago or so, and these online repositories of homework and tests emerged. What happened is that homework assignments became less predictive of how students would do in exams and in the course, because so many were relying on those repositories. Now we have Gen AI, and so now it's like, when we think about student learning and what they can achieve, that seems to be so precarious right now. And that concerns me.
Yes.
It feels like we need to step up our game too. Like teach different, like the ChatGPT is going to give you a ton of the answers. So how do we teach and change how we teach so that you learn that core knowledge?
Yep.
Feels like that's coming.
Yeah, it's a fascinating time to be an educator and to be a hiring manager, frankly. Mm-hmm. And Laura, you've kind of touched on both of those things. Is there, I guess I'm super interested in what, coming out of COVID-19, you mentioned this earlier, but how are you seeing people look at their supply chains and their sense of supply chain capacity and resiliency? Are you seeing people look at it differently, or do you think we should be looking at it differently now based on what we've learned?
Well, it kind of depends on the sector. It's very complicated right now. We've got tariffs and more regulation that's sort of hanging above us right now that really does affect a lot of how we view supply chains. But I think the common theme to all of that since COVID-19 is that we were operating under a set of assumptions prior to 2020. And we saw a lot of those assumptions really weren't valid during the pandemic. We had major labor shortages, massive disruptions in supply, a lot of issues with, trade due to the pandemic. And now, I think kind of designing a new system with a new set of assumptions and rules is kind of the world we're operating in, and understanding how to be nimble if things do change is like a core competency that a lot of organizations need.
Yeah, I think I can't imagine the uncertainties that you're living with right now if you're responsible for supply chain. Right. I think that has an international component, certainly.
True. But also can be exciting, and this is where the grand challenges and what we have to offer comes in, because if you're operating under new assumptions and you have a lot more flexibility to design, you could really screw things up, or you could really elevate things under a new paradigm to be much better, much more resilient and secure. And that's where these systems engineering skills could be so valuable. They've never been more valuable.
How's the paper doing, publicity wise? Is it getting picked up, or do you feel like it needs more publicity? How's it being
always
received?
More publicity?
Yeah, exactly. Always more. But how's it being received? Is it being received pretty well received in the community?
Oh yeah, I think it's been pretty well received in the community. It's not really tied into everybody's going to introduce it to their courses, and that's where I think that I would like that more publicity to make sure students are aware of it. So thank you for helping add to the publicity.
No, we're definitely trying. It was a great paper. It makes you think big for sure.
So far, we've only danced around the AI topic. I'd love to kind of run at it a little bit more directly. Selfishly interested in we're seeing a kind of transition between we're adding GenAI to the roles of all sorts of workers who are on the hook to make decisions. And kind of what does the future look like? Do we see decision-making processes being transformed? Do we see accountability shifting? It's unfair to ask you to have a crystal ball, Laura, but that's why we're the hosts and you're the guest. You get to ask.
Yeah, I do think a lot's going to be changing in the near future. Mistakes will be made. Breakthroughs will also be made. One area that I think is very consequential for our field is AI governance. So we think about structures, who has power, how things are organized, where information flows. The governance is, pretty powerful. It's more powerful than these feedback loops that AI creates even. And there's a lot of potential there for, deploying AI responsibly. And I do see industrial and systems engineers having the right skills to do governance really well. And if we prepare our students through education and through inspiration, that hopefully will produce some leaders there that will really make a difference. So that's my crystal ball: is governance is the opportunity.
What do you see? What do you see industrial engineers? What's the biggest thing we can contribute to the governance? How if I'm a young industrial engineer, how should I think about contributing to that?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of different ways. I mean, governance is composed of different aspects. Like in an organization that has governance, and just developing those responsible AI principles. A lot of those come with costs as well. They take time. Doing AI audits takes time. You can look at some of these reports in the New York City Comptroller's office. They do the annual AI audits. They're really long reports. They take time. Yeah. And I'm like, can't you make these reports a little shorter so you can actually do your job? But also, I'm glad they're doing the AI audits. And so it's those systems pieces that come together that does it well. So it's that systems thinking about understanding that there are costs and benefits, and you have a job to do and you want to do it really well, but then you have this responsibility and governance piece. But also thinking about kind of how to design the rules of the game, so to speak. So it kind of depends on the role of the individual. But even an engineer on an AI team has an important role in governance and responsibility to make sure processes are implemented the way that they are supposed to be implemented, and also to create better governance. I mean, sometimes some of that is bottom up.
Yeah, I like you brought up trade-offs. I've had some conversations with people in the field, and it's I think trade-offs are just hard for people to agree to in general. It's you want a great AI audit? Yep, I want the best one possible. Do you want people to do exactly what they're supposed to do in their job? Yep, I want that too. And it's, I think, important for our field to sort of understand, there is definitely a trade-off. You can't be perfect on everything, or, you have to realize that things have costs and things have benefits, and make the best decision that you can.
You hit the nail on the head. We do this so well in industrial and systems engineering, is explaining trade-offs, and that we think in terms of those trade-offs, that sometimes I don't really always remember that that's such a benefit to what we do until I talk to somebody else in a different field, and they're like, oh, it's just simple, just do this. And then I'm like, what about the trade-offs? And I'm like, oh yeah, like not everybody just thinks in terms of trade-offs right off the bat.
Yeah.
It's a delicate balance, and you need to, folks that understand those trade-offs and understand how to strike the right balance are desperately needed.
Yeah, I learned somewhere at some point in my career, I was talking to someone in some group, and I was like, we were doing trade-offs and like what features or something to implement. And it was like, all right, so these features are not important. I put those at the bottom. And everyone's like, no, they're all important. I'm like, okay. So you have to be very careful when you talk to the general public about trade-offs. You'd be like, this stuff's really important. This stuff is also important, but it's a little lower than the really important stuff.
Understood. Yeah. If everything's a priority, then nothing's a priority.
Right, yeah. Exactly.
That's hard to digest.
It is.
Once again, Mike, going off the board, since we're having so much fun with Laura. So, Laura, Doug Gray and Evan Shelster just published a book called Why Data Science Projects Fail. We have Doug on the podcast just recently, recorded with him. I'd love to get your sense on, if not failure, what are the things that you see us doing as a field that consistently limit our impact and our effectiveness and our value creation?
That's a big question, and
it is, and the list may be so long. You don't have to go through all of it, but what pops in your head?
One thing is that we talked about earlier is just a lot of small thinking, and that's why the opportunities where we can have big conversations is important. And we don't necessarily even really do that at conferences. It's a lot of discussing papers. Some of those are very important, but having venues for some of that big thinking is crucial. Also, as an academic, I'm going to give you some answers as an academic that a lot of times we focus on the impact in terms of like tenure and promotion, which I think is really important, of course, but it's a lot. Sometimes it can get a little bean counting, and we sometimes I think very insularly about what the impact is. It's just like publishing in these really good journals is the biggest impact one could have. And I think we need to systematically, when we're thinking big, of like understanding and appreciating the different types of impact and making sure that we celebrate them. I really appreciate how Inform celebrates big impact, of course, with the Franz Edelman Award, but also the Wagner Prize, the Impact Prize. A lot of organizations don't always celebrate in that type of way. And that's a big piece of it, is just making sure that we can sit back and celebrate some of the big impact.
Yeah, the Edelman Award is right up there on my list of things that should get publicized more. Like it feels like these are just great pieces of work.
Yeah, and really impressive stuff.
And occasionally, and actually regularly, academics are part of these teams winning these impact prizes at Informs. And if I'm writing a tenure or promotion letter, I really make sure to highlight that, because usually it's considered like above and beyond our expectations, but really impact is the name of the game. And it's a little bit grassroots, but just, again, celebrating, having a culture where we celebrate that type of impact is always a good thing.
Excellent. Mike, over to you.
Yeah, so I think you're an expert in cybersecurity, and I'm almost clueless in that area. Like, what are some of the basics that someone in operations research or industrial engineering should know about cybersecurity? Like, where can we contribute? Because my naive thinking is like it's a lot of just computer science people.
It is a lot of computer science people. The one thing I will tell you about cybersecurity is it's a really big topic. So even though I know a lot about it, there's like way more that I don't know at all. But on the plus side, it's a really big topic. It's a big umbrella. There's a lot to do. Where there isn't enough attention, I think, is at the system level. So thinking systematically about how to manage risks in these big, complex systems. And a lot of the work is very specific on like one specific piece of software, one exploit or one defense. So I don't really get down into that level. I'm like at a higher level of kind of modeling and granularity. But it is really important. And I'll tell you just a brief story, because I was on a radio program talking about cybersecurity. They took calls and somebody calls in and he's like, Bob, there are so many cyber threats out there. like, I can't even count them all. How do you possibly protect a system, against all these threats? And I said, well, not only that, you also have to protect against all the risks in the supply chain. So you have to protect your systems and your supply chains, and you have a limited budget. And that's basically the value proposition that we have. So it's a target-rich environment, I would say, for operations research. It's data poor because a lot of times it's hard to get the real data on cyber breaches, as you can imagine. Organizations don't want to share that information. But there are a lot of opportunities there. So I would say in their next conference, go to a cyber session. And,
Okay, and what you said, it sounds like it's just interconnected with other things. It's interconnected with your manufacturing plant, with your supply chain, and because you're not just trying to get into IT systems, but you're also trying to disrupt the supply chain or mess up shipping or something like that.
I'm doing some work on power systems because their next generation power systems have all these benefits, but they're much more connected, and that they can potentially open us up to more risk. So how do we think about modeling and protecting that right off the bat?
Do you have any stories about sort of how prevalent or how many cyber threats companies get on average that would sort of just be very interesting to someone who doesn't know this and think about it? Is it all the time, every day, every minute, these systems are getting pinged and attacked?
They don't always know all the true, what's a true positive and some of that data, but they do a lot of scans. So there's stuff, my organization, which is a large university, there's stuff that comes back and they have a list of the really concerning stuff. And then they ignore a lot, which is, to me, is just overwhelming. But, you start looking for stuff, you're going to find things, and not everything's a concern.
Okay.
So that it's a little bit overwhelming in that way. To me, it's the one story I come back to a lot is the Equifax breach, because there was a known vulnerability. There was a fix made to it, and the patch was available, and they just didn't install it. And then you had, at the time, the biggest security breach occurs 3 months after the patch was installed, which, this is well, don't you have a system for, getting your defenses up as quickly as possible? This is an IE problem.
Right.
What was the story, Laura, that you know about that? How was it? Was it sort of somebody got the code and asked a question that nobody responded? Was it sitting on a shelf somewhere, a digital? How did this not get deployed? Was there any kind of triage on that?
I don't know about that part. I have some theories, but the forensics afterwards found the exact exploit, and then it's on a digital shelf somewhere that they should have downloaded and installed the patch. But there's something in the workflow that it just didn't happen.
Well, interestingly, we hear a lot of stories like that about data science and OR solutions that have been developed in a sandbox and then come to production, and there's a series of barriers around testing, compliance, and things, and suddenly those benefits don't get accrued because those things don't get into production. So this story sort of immediately reminded me of that. Yeah,
and that's basically software supply chains in a nutshell. It's just very, very difficult. There's a lot of practical barriers that exist.
And then a whole lot of synchronization, right, across data sources and user interfaces and outputs that I think is only getting faster. We're only kind of innovating more quickly with yet more challenges to get the value and to get things to actually have the impact that was promised in the sales cycle. I could go on and on.
So Laura,
Mike, do you want to? I have a penultimate question I'd like before throwing over to you for the last question.
Ask yours. Go ahead.
So, Laura, I think my first encounter with you was with your website, Punk Rock OR. I can't even begin to tell you how much I appreciated that. Tell me the genesis and the inspiration and kind of what that ethos is about, and kind of how that informs your career, if appropriate.
Oh, sure. I started the blog in 2007. It was my first year in a tenure track position. I had in mind that I wanted to start a blog because it was, I started my first tenure track position in 2006. So it was like the heyday of bloggers. I think it's still the heyday of bloggers, to be honest. I still blog like it's 2007. But it was just a great way to kind of talk about the field and do some outreach. My dissertation was on aviation security, so I had the opportunity to do public outreach, and it grew on me. And I thought that operations research is a well-kept secret, and it shouldn't be. So that's kind of where it started. Where it's gone, I've had a lot of people say, oh, it's kind of a waste of time. It distracts you. But it doesn't, because it's like once you start writing, it's good. It's helped my teaching. My teaching has helped my blogging. And I've gotten to know so many people over the years through the blog. And so to me, it's been the gift that keeps on giving. And, relationships are some of the most valuable things that we have. And the professional relationships that have come about from the blog it means so much.
Excellent.
Sounds great. Well, thanks for answering our questions today. Thanks for being a guest. We really appreciate it.